Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Welcome back to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I am so glad you're here. If you're new, welcome. So excited to talk wine with you. And of course, for those who have been joining for a while, thanks for sticking around with me. Today's episode, I am very excited for. It is our second ever listener request episode. So this one goes out to Sheila. She reached out to me and asked for a deep dive on Txakoli. And it doesn't look like how it's spelt. It's spelled T-X-A-K-O-L-I. So basically that T-X in the front makes like a C-H sound. So Txakoli. And she's been seeing it popping up more and more around her, and she was curious to learn more about it. So, of course, we need to do that. If you ever want to request an episode or want to learn about something here on the podcast, just send me a message. You can send me a message on Instagram at Cork and Fizz, or send me an email, haley@corkandfizz.com. There is no wine question that is too silly or too beginner to cover on this show. And of course, if you want to do a deep dive into something more specific and, getting really deep into the wine world, I would love to do that too. So first we have to talk about Txakoli. So at first, I was thinking that this would be a grape deep dive episode. I've done a few of these already. We've talked about Merlot, Cabernet Franc, I think Chardonnay, maybe Chenin Blanc as well. I'm trying to think of all of them. You can go back and look them all up in the previous episodes. I'm okay, great. We'll do a grape, another continuation of the grape deep dive. And that's when I realized Txakoli is not a grape. It's a style of wine, and it usually refers to dry white wine from the Basque Country of Spain. And it's known for being slightly sparkling, fruity, and refreshing. So if you're listening to this live, maybe doesn't quite fit the season now, but it's still a great wine. And then this way you'll be ready to go and summertime to go look for a Txakoli. But I have a feeling after listening to this, you'll want to taste one now. You won't want to wait. So instead of a grape deep dive, we're going to do a wine deep dive. So let's dive into it. Good one, right? Okay. Let's start with just some kind of geographical context. Let's, I always like to kind of picture ourselves. Let's put ourselves there. Where is this wine from? So we talked about this wine is from the Basque region of Spain. Where is that? So Basque Country, Basque region, it's spelled B-A-S-Q-U-E, Basque Country. It's an autonomous community that sits on the extreme western end of Spain's border with France at the foot of the Pyrenees Mountains. Highly recommend. Check it out on a map. I know you're probably listening to this right now, but if you get a second, look it up. I think it'll kind of help you kind of picture where this is. Autonomous just means that they do rule themselves. Spain has a few of these regions. Galicia is one of them, Basque Country, and then Catalonia, which is where a lot of cava comes from, is also one. And the main things here is they're still a part of Spain, but they typically do a lot of governing themselves. They also have their own culture and their own language, which is why we see with this wine specifically, Txakoli, that TX, that is from the Basque language, or the language they speak. I can't remember if they call it Basque or not, but the language they speak there, that is where that comes from, which is why you don't see that in Spanish. This region, it's also located on the coast of the Cantabrian Sea, which is also called the Bay of Biscay. So this region is known for high rainfall, lush green hillsides, and picturesque coastline. And so what's interesting is that, to me, sounds very similar to another region in Spain, which is Galicia, which is where we find a lot of Albarino. So you ever heard of Albarino? It's this high-acid, salty white wine, beautiful with seafood, comes from that Galicia region. So this area produces a similar style of wine, which makes sense because their geography is very similar. The vineyards that produce the grapes for Txakoli wine are in the northernmost area of Basque Country, and again, many along that coastline. And we'll talk about how that affects the style of wine more. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. Now, super quick on the name specification, because you're going to likely see a few different things, and I kind of want to make sure you have an understanding of what these things are. I'm also going to say a couple different things on the podcast, and I don't want you to be like, wait, what did she say? So you may also see the term Txakolina. So it's like Txakoli, Txakoli, but with N-A at the end, Txakolina. This basically translates to the Txakoli. So they basically mean the same thing. If you're gonna see them both, I'm sure people of Basque Country would say that it's not the same thing, and there is some very specific thing different about them. But for the purpose of this podcast, Txakoli, Txakolina are going to basically mean the same thing. You may also see Txakoli spelt with a CH in the front, and that's when it's written in French or Spanish. Remember that TX is from the Basque language, their autonomous community. They have their own language. The term Txakoli comes from the Arabic word txakole, which means thinness, which again kind of reflects the style of wine that this is. So now that we kind of have an idea, Txakoli, Txakolina, we're going to say both of those. Let's talk about history a little bit here. So Txakoli has been made in the Basque region of Spain from around the 15th century, like this specific style of wine. Now, winemaking in general here goes back to at least the 8th century, if not earlier, right? But Txakoli, for the longest time, was primarily just an easy fisherman's and farmer's wine. They were considered unattractive drinks with an uncontrolled and high acidity. And this was really up until about 30 years ago. So the first thing that kind of helped bring them to attention and bring them to the forefront of the wine industry was the creation of the first DO for this wine. Now, DO in Spain, it stands for Denominación de Origen, which indicates a protected geographical region for producing high-quality wines. In the US, we call those AVAs. In France, they call those AOCs. So like Burgundy or Champagne, or here in the US, we have Napa Valley, Walla Walla Valley, right? These are all specific regions that produce a certain style of wine. They have certain rules they have to follow, and they're basically guaranteed to produce a certain quality of wine. So our first DO dedicated to Txakoli wine was created in 1990. Then, basically kind of coming off of that, a revival at the turn of the millennium brought even more attention to this wine. There was more focus on precision vine cultivation, on hand harvesting. To be honest, not like they were really doing machine harvesting before then, because they really can't. We'll talk about that. They also focused on better knowledge of the soil conditions and the climate characteristics. There was also a big interest in the culinary world as well. The wine pairs well with such a large array of food that you were finding these Michelin star chefs creating multi-course dinners paired with different Txakoli wines. So this really started to get focused, and it makes sense why our listener started seeing these pop up more and was like, hey, what is this? So let's dig into some grape and wine basics here. So like I said, Txakoli is not a grape. It is a style of wine. It is made primarily from the grape called Hondarrabi Zuri. It's a native white grape to the Basque Country. Now, some people believe Hondarrabi Zuri refers to a family of grapes, and these include a grape called Corbu grape from southwest France, This has been proven to be basically identical to the Hondarrabi Zuri grape, which is used in Basque Country. There are also two other Basque grapes, Crochen and Noa, that are believed to be kind of part of this family, and that a lot of people, or at least they say that like sometimes in Basque Country, if they call it Hondarrabi Zuri, it might be these other two grapes as well. So kind of gives you an idea. I think it just kind of means, Zuri means white in Basque Country, so it's basically like the white wine of this region. Now, they can also use Hondarrabi Beltza. Beltza is black. That is the red grape or the black grape of the region. Despite the similarity in names, not related to Hondarrabi Zuri. That would be too easy, I guess. But it's basically just like the red grape of the region, right? Versus Hondarrabi Zuri is the white grape. The Hondarrabi Beltza, the black or red grape, is actually closely related to Cabernet Franc, and it is primarily used in rosé and red production. And yes, there are rosé and red versions of Txakoli, though most of them are white. And this is where it kind of gets confusing because you're like, you told me Txakoli was a white, high-acid wine from the Basque Country. It's like, yes, 90% of the time. That is true. However, you can also find a rosé and a red version of this wine as well. So just pay attention to that when you're shopping for wine. So while most Txakoli are made with either the Hondarrabi Zuri or the Hondarrabi Beltza, in 2021, the Regulatory Council approved blending with other grapes, and these include Pinot Noir and Cabernet Franc. They might not always be called these when you look on the bottle if they do say anything about these. I noticed that they all kind of had different names, likely based on the region that they're coming from. So the two other red grapes they can include are Pinot Noir and Cabernet Franc. In terms of white grape, they can also use Feuille Blanche, Gros Manseng, Petit Manseng, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, and Chardonnay. Though again, primarily using those Hondarrabi Zuri and Hondarrabi Beltza grapes. And as I mentioned earlier, Txakoli mainly refers to white wine, but you can also have red, rosé, and sparkling versions of this. So honestly, by the time things like anything that makes it to the US is primarily, I've seen white and rosé. I've never seen a red or sparkling. But maybe more of those are coming over here, so it could be fun to check it out. Now, we already talked about there was one DO, remember, one smaller region created a denominación de origen for Txakoli, but now there are actually 3 of them. And the style of wine that comes from each one is slightly different. So when talking about what kind of wine you can expect, I think it's important to know what DO, what region did that Txakoli come from? This podcast is sponsored by Repour Wine Savers. Listen, I love wine, but that doesn't mean I want to drink a full bottle every night. You see, it's always a risk opening a bottle knowing I'll only have a glass or two. But now I don't worry about that at all because I have Repour. These little contraptions will keep your open bottles of wine good for up to 3 months by removing oxygen from the bottle using fancy chemistry. And they're so easy to use. I simply open a bottle of wine, cork or screw cap, just like normal, and enjoy my glass or two. Then, when I'm ready to call it a night, I rip the foil off my Repour Wine Saver and place it in the bottle in place of the cork or screw cap, and then stick the bottle in the fridge. Simple as that. Then, whenever I grab another glass from that bottle in the future, I just make sure to put the Repour back on as soon as I'm done pouring. It's that easy. Want to give Repour a try? Head to repour.com, REPOUR.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ for 10% off your order. That's Repour, REPOUR.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ. No spaces in that, and the and is spelled out, so it's CORKANDFIZZ. Once you have Repour, you'll never have to worry about opening a bottle of wine just for one glass. I mean, heck, now you can try 2 or more wines at the same time and have your own at-home wine tasting. This podcast is sponsored by the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club. Interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you love the idea of tasting wine live with me. If that's you, Come join my Cork Crew virtual wine club, and you'll get to sip wine with me twice a month while I help you find new favorite wines. The Cork Crew is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. And the best part about this club, purchasing the wine is completely optional. Plus, all events are recorded, and you have access to the full library of recordings as a Cork Crew member, so you can always catch up if you can't make it live. Oh, and did I mention it's virtual, which means you get to do all of this from the comfort of your sofa in your PJs. No need to worry about driving in crappy traffic, finding a designated driver, or spending an arm and a leg on a taxi. Want to give it a try without the commitment? You're in luck. Right now, I'm offering a free class pass to anybody who wants to try out the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Tasting Club. With this pass, you'll be able to join a Cork Crew event of your choosing. No strings attached. I don't need your credit card. I don't need you to sign up for anything. You'll be my guest. Simply head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to get your class pass and be one step closer to becoming a member of the best wine tasting club around, the Cork Crew. I can't wait to see you there. Now let's get back to the show. So we're going to go through them in the order that they were created. So the first one, the one that was created in 1990 or established in 1990, this is the DO that is Getarico Txakolina. And I might not be saying that first part totally correct. It is Getariako, Getarico Txakolina. That KO at the end of that term is actually equivalent to like apostrophe S in English. So it literally translates to, remember, Txakolina basically translates to the Txakoli. And then if we're putting like an apostrophe S at the end of this term, it basically translates to the Txakoli of Getaria. And so they're basically saying like the region is Getaria and this DO is called Getarico Txakolina, meaning the Txakoli from Getaria. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a little harder listening to it than reading it, but we're basically talking about the region of Getaria and the Txakoli that comes from there. 90% of the grapes here are located incredibly close to the Cantabrian Sea. They're planted in extremely steep slopes. Remember when I said like they were like focusing on hand harvesting, but also they really couldn't do anything other than that before. This is because of these steep slopes. You really can't take a machine down something that has an elevation or a slope like that. So hand harvesting is a must. Now, if you've ever had Txakoli outside of Basque Country, so if you did not travel to the Basque Country and you just found a Txakoli in a wine shop somewhere, it was very likely from this region, from the Getariako Txakolina. This region produces Txakoli that has higher pH than the other ones. And it has that pronounced saltiness. It's almost like it has this memory of the ocean. These are going to have that slightly sparkling note to them. And note that it's primarily the Txakoli from this region that have that. You can find Txakoli that does not have that slightly sparkling. So these won't have like a cap like a champagne or even a Prosecco would have, but they do have some carbon dioxide that is trapped during the winemaking process. It's just not as much. So you can usually put a cork on these and not have a problem with them like popping off. These wines, if you've ever heard of Txakoli, or you've been to Basque and seen them pouring this wine, it is often traditionally poured from a tall height, meaning they like lift the bottle up really high and they have the bottle down below and they're pouring it from this tall height. And this is known as breaking the wine. There's a word in Spanish, escanciar is what that term means, basically, to break the wine. And it allows contact with the air. Basically, we're aerating it, and it enhances the aroma and flavors. And note, this is only done with the Txakoli that has the slight effervescence. You don't want to do it with ones that don't have any of that bubbly kind of spritziness to them. And again, the wines, the Txakoli from this region are primarily going to be high acidity, low alcohol, and that slight effervescence. Very refreshing. Then we have the next region. This is the Bizkaico Txakolina, and it basically means the Txakoli of Biscay. Remember, the Bay of Biscay is right around this area. This was established 4 years later in 1994. This area tends to produce more complex wines. So a lot of these vineyards actually face south rather than facing the coast because they want to allow the grapes to ripen more fully. Remember, anytime we face slopes towards the equator, We're getting more of that perfect sunshine and right at the perfect times to ripen our grapes just like we want to. The wines here, some of the best, are often compared with the finest Rieslings from Alsace. And these are not going to be effervescent. They're still going to have that high acidity, still pretty low alcohol, though we're getting a little higher now, a little more of a richer mouthfeel. And we'll talk about winemaking styles in a little bit on like how we can do that other than just growing the grapes slightly differently. Now, the last one is the Arabocco Txakolina. This region was nearly lost. It was down to just 5 hectares despite a really long winemaking history before it was saved, and they started making a lot of Txakoli. And so now it is the smallest DO for Txakoli, but the fastest growing. So it was established in 2001. It is completely inland, so it is not along the coast, but it still is close enough to get that sea breeze. It is similar in style to our Bizcocho, so a little bit more complex. The grapes are going to ripen more. We're going to get a little more alcohol, thus giving us a little more body, and we're not going to have that effervescence for the most part. Okay, now that you know the 3 regions, again, keep an eye out for those when you are shopping for Txakoli. Let's talk about the different styles of wine that Txakoli can make. So the one that most people know of is this light, refreshing, fresh bottle of wine, right? And this is Txakoli that is fermented in stainless steel tanks. Some of that carbon dioxide is trapped during the winemaking process. It's aged for maybe 6 months and it is bottled young. This wine results in a light, refreshing, just like a wine meant to be drunk young. This is your like porch pounder. This is your like go-to summer bottle, a great picnic wine as well. It's just light and fun. Now, some Txakoli are being made to be more complex. So they're doing this thing where they age on the lees. And if you've never heard of lees, so it's Lees, lees, that is what happens to the yeast after it has done doing the fermentation. So in order to make wine, we add yeast to our grape juice, which has sugar, or the yeast just exists on the outside of the grapes. And the yeast eats the sugar and produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. When there's no sugar left for the yeast to eat, it essentially dies and it becomes lees. And these lees end up giving the wine, if you leave them in there, certain lees. Now, this is interesting because some wines, the lees won't be any good and you don't want to add that flavor to it. But many wines, you can keep them in there. And if you stir them in with the wine or keep the wine in contact with them, it can give the wine a little bit of a richer mouthfeel. So it like coats your mouth a little bit more. And it can also give it like bready taste, like brioche. This is what gives champagne that kind of brioche, bready toast taste to it. And this is also, if you remember, we talked about muscadet, I believe, at some point on this podcast. They also stir in the lees. It's called batonnage, so that they can get that richer mouthfeel. You may also see them doing barrel fermentation instead of stainless steel. Those barrels, again, are going to give it a little rounder feel, rounder taste. Can potentially give it a little flavor depending on how old the barrel is. Newer barrels give it more flavor. It might be aged a bit longer. And again, we're still going to have that super bright acidity from the grapes themselves, but it's going to create that richer mouthfeel, the like heavier body. In terms of tasting notes, a Txakoli is known for flavors of green apple, grapefruit, lime, salinity, so like this like saltiness, remember, like the memory of the ocean, and sometimes a little bit of pineapple as well. And of course, if you get one that has a little bit more of that complexity, you might notice brioche, you might notice some toast, maybe some yellow apple instead of green apple, right? It's kind of died down a little bit. Generally, lighter bodied, lower alcohol. Now, if you're curious, I did have to one question that I had, I'm like, okay, this is the white style of Txakoli, but what does a red Txakoli taste like? This was hard to discover, so you might have to do some research of your own. But the main notes that I got are pepper, currant, and raspberry. And then for the rosé, which I have actually had a rosé Txakoli, I think that might actually be the first Txakoli I ever tasted was a rosé. This is going to have these really bright red fruits with citrus. And then I can have a really strong green pepper note, which is interesting because, again, remember this red grape that is used in the red and the rosé, it's related to Cabernet Franc, which is known for having this green pepper note to it. So this other wine that's related also produced that same flavor. In terms of cost, these are really affordable wines. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen one over $30, $15 to $30 is all you're really going to need to spend on these. They're meant to be drank young for the most part. In terms of pairing with food, seafood of any kind is going to go with this. I love the rosé with either like a shrimp taco or a carnitas taco. If you take a trip to the Basque Country, you would see these wines paired with what are called tapas, which are just like little plates. And in Basque Country, they actually call those pinchos. And they're typically like a piece of bread with then like something on top of it, either like some type of seafood, there's sometimes like an egg, like omelet type dish. It's called tortilla española. There might also be like a potato thing of some kind. But they're all these just kind of like small dishes that you're meant to like have like multiple of them. And then they're paired with this like very simple, fun, effervescent wine. Also work really well with like soft cheeses that are super creamy. Because this is going to balance it out, right? That's kind of like a contrasting pairing in that situation. Okay, and before we go, I just wanted to give you a couple recommended producers to be on the lookout for. I'll also put these in the show notes just because I have a feeling listening to them is a little harder to tell what I'm saying because, again, these are all from the Basque Country, so they're all pronounced not maybe how you would expect. And I'm also probably going to totally butcher it, but I'm going to try my best. The first one is Chomen Echaniz. This is from that first region we talked about, Txakoli. They are kind of like the go-to. Like, this is the one, if you're ever going to try any Txakoli, you should try this producer. They are the most known and kind of like the most traditional. Then you have Rezabal. This is the one that I have tried before. And this is actually, I've tried their rosé. I don't know if I've tried their white, but I know their rosé gets imported into the US all the time. This is also, of course, from the Txakoli. Then you have Doniene Gorondona. This is from the second region we talked about, Txakoli. And then there's also Bodega Elizalde from that same region. And then lastly, I wanted to give you a recommendation for the final region, and that is Malcoa. So that one comes from the Arabaco Txakoli. Like I said, I'll list all these producers in the show notes as well, because I know that's going to be hard to try to remember. But if you give any of these a try or you find another Txakoli, please send me a message. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear it. I think this is just such a lovely, fun wine. It's a great one to introduce to friends. And like I said, it is a perfect summer wine, but you don't have to wait for summer to enjoy it. All right, that is our episode today. Thank you again to Sheila for the request on the podcast subject. Again, if you have recommendations or things that you want me to talk about and you want to learn about, just send me a message. I'm so happy to put something together for you. And if you know a wine lover in your life who would enjoy this podcast, please share it with them. You can find your favorite episode or just take a screenshot right now and post it on your social media. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I release new episodes every Wednesday. We are coming on like a year and a half of every Wednesday podcast. Isn't that crazy? In next year's episode, I will be sharing some of my favorite wine books. And I promise this podcast is not 2 hours long, even though it could be because I have so many wine books. I've picked out my favorite, I think 13 to tell you about. Thanks again for listening. And if you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. And if you're interested in exploring new wines and joining an incredible community of wine lovers, be sure to sign up for my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. You can head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to come check out a tasting for free. Cheers!